Well guys, here we are on my new adventure bike. So if you guys are familiar with this model, you probably already recognize it, but for those of you who aren't, this is a 2008 Kawasaki KLR 650. This particular bike is a pristine example of what a well-used, somewhat beat-up KLR can look like. It's perfect for what I was looking for, which is kind of an entry-level adventure bike, something that doesn't break the bank, but that should allow me to actually get out, play around in the dirt, and kind of experience a modern motorcycle and see what I like and what I don't like before I, spend some big bucks on something else. So let me go through a little bit of my thought process on how I went about kind of picking which bike to get, and then I'll go into detail about this particular bike. So when I was looking for adventure bikes, I found myself kind of putting bikes into three categories. There was the entry-level, less expensive option, which is what this bike fell into. So it was basically KLRs, some kind of higher mileage DRZ 400s, stuff like that. And then there was the kind of mid-range, which was, well, let's see, BMW 650 GS's, maybe, nicer DRZ 650s. And then there was the highest option, which was like Triumph Tiger 800 XCs, BMW 800 GS's. And that's about as high as I wanted to go. If you guys remember from one of my previous videos, I really didn't want like a 1200 GS or anything quite that big. So I actually started to look at bikes. I went and looked at a few. I almost pulled the trigger on a Triumph Tiger 800. But what I decided to do was actually just buy a bike, entry-level price point, and learn about how I like to ride. What kind of riding am I going to be doing? Is it going to be, majority on-road with light off-road? Am I going to be doing any camping? Are we going to be more like staying in cabins and that kind of stuff? So there's a lot of kind of unanswered questions when it comes to my, we'll call it, upcoming adventure bike career. So I had a hard time justifying spending $7,000 to $8,000 on a motorcycle without knowing exactly what I'm going to use it for. So let me go into detail about why I picked this particular bike. So this is a KLR 650, like I mentioned, 2008 model, but the KLR 650, if you're not familiar, it was in production for like roughly 30 years. I believe they started somewhere in the mid to late 80s. They made them all the way up until like a couple of years ago, and they are almost unchanged for that entire period. Like most of the parts will bolt on and everything to any model year. This is technically a second gen, which I think 2008 might be the first year for, which as far as I can tell, all they did was kind of make it a little bit uglier. It's not a particularly beautiful motorcycle, but that's not why I bought it. I bought it because I felt like it was a really good kind of transition from classic motorcycles, what I typically work on, most of my bikes are 1970s or older, to a more modern motorcycle as far as the parts are 30 years newer than my other Kawasaki, but the technology really isn't. It's still a carburetor, it's still like this is a CDI ignition. Like there's nothing on this bike that is at all intimidating to me, which I think is really important for a bike that I plan on kind of taking out into the wilderness and getting lost on. I want to have complete confidence that I can work on and fix the bike. So I wanted something that wasn't too terribly complicated. Also, because these bikes were in production for so long, you can find parts for these pretty much anywhere. It's like I said, they made them all the way up until I believe it's 2017. Don't quote me on that. But what that means is you can pretty much go to any Kawasaki dealership and most of this bike is going to be on the shelf. That can't be said for my KZ750. That's a Kawasaki, but they might have two things at the dealership that will work. Everything else I'm going to have to order or find an aftermarket universal solution for, or something like that. So if I'm out riding on that KZ750 and I'm in some random small town somewhere and something happens, it's going to be a lot harder for me to find parts for, where this bike, it can be fixed with a hammer and the parts are readily available. So this bike, like I mentioned, has about 7,600 miles on it now. The next video you see is going to be me going through this entire bike and just getting everything in kind of tip-top shape. So the guy I bought this from rode it a decent amount, but he bought an Africa Twin and had been riding that for the most part. He's owned it for a couple, or had owned it for a couple of years, and it basically became his, I think he referred to it as his guest bike. So if he had friends in town or whatever, this is the bike they rode. And you can tell that it's got some bumps and scrapes, and I gotta fix that, and this is all scraped up, and it's the perfect amount of abused so that it brought the price down. Also, now I'm not scared to, you know, slide it up against a tree or inevitably drop it on a dirt road or something, because it's already scratched up. Like an adventure bike is supposed to look like that. So it was the right amount of that, but it's low miles. You know, 7,000 miles on one of these is nothing. I mean, I've seen these with 50, 60, 70,000 miles on them with no major services required. So I know that once I get it all fully kind of tuned up, it should be a very reliable motorcycle that I can basically put as many miles as I want to on it. It's got some decent upgrades to it. He put the KLR tank bag on it. It's got these SW Motec engine guards, which is nice. I will probably upgrade this skid plate to something a little bit heavier duty. This looks like it's just some kind of composite or plastic or something. Probably get a metal engine guard, so if we're bashing it up against some rocks, we don't have to worry about that. Has a full Two Brothers Racing exhaust on it, which supposedly gives you a little bit more horsepower. It certainly makes it very loud. I'll have to figure that out. I don't particularly like the sound of it. A big single cylinder, you know, some people will hate on me for saying this, but I don't know that there's an exhaust that can make one of those sound good. So I would kind of prefer it to just be quieter. So we might look into maybe repacking that. Seat's in really good shape. It does come with a factory kind of luggage rack on the back, but I want to add some more like pannier style racks so that we can really load this thing down and put camping gear or, you know, the full toolkit, whatever else we want to bring with us on our adventures. We can put them in there. I believe this is a little bit taller windscreen. Does a pretty good job of blocking the air while you're riding. It's actually the only bike I've ever owned that's had one of those, which is pretty nice. It does need some new tires. The front tire is not bad, but this rear one is pretty square. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on video, but the center section is pretty flat, which makes for a little bit weird feeling when you're turning, because you're riding on that flat spot and then kind of coming over that crown. So we are gonna put some new tires on it. I gotta figure that out. So now that I'm on my favorite little back road, I will kind of tell you guys my thoughts on the bike so far and kind of my plans for it. So I've only had the bike for, you know, 200 miles, so I can't really give it a full review, but I guess it's more first impressions. For power, I'm gonna say adequate. I think most of this bike, the review is going to be just that, adequate. So the power is plenty for what the bike is designed to do. It'll get you up to highway speeds, no problem. It will, you know, be able to pass people. Also has a decent amount of low end power, so you can kind of just tractor your way up some hills and stuff. What I have noticed, and it's probably more gearing than it is power, if I'm riding my KZ750 and I go, you know, I'm cruising down a back road and there's a big uphill and I'm in 5th gear, I don't have to downshift on that bike. I don't even feel the need to. This bike, I feel the need to downshift. And that's, again, probably more gearing than it is power. It's just something I'm gonna have to adjust my riding style. Everything else, though, it seems to be like it's a pretty comfortable bike. I mean, the seat's really not bad. The riding position's pretty good. The suspension, you can definitely tell that it's made to go off-road. It's very soft and dirt bike-like suspension, which on the road, you know, gives you a nice comfortable ride. It's not super confidence-inspiring in the heavy twisties, but again, that's not what this bike is designed to do. So if you're truly riding this bike, you know, dual sport as it's intended for, it does everything pretty well. You guys ready to feel what a single 650 is like? it's not bad. I mean, like I said, it's totally adequate. Did I feel like I was in a MotoGP race? No, but it's not what it's made for. It's made for cruising, and it'll do, you know, 65, 70 miles an hour. You'll want some earplugs, but it'll just cruise like this, no problem. So my plans for this bike are, we're gonna go through and do all the maintenance, put new tires on it, all that stuff. And then we're gonna determine how good is this bike? How long is it gonna stay in the Classic Octane fleet? Is it something I can see myself riding for the next year or so? Or will it be a quick turnaround and we end up upgrading or trying something different? That's to be determined. I can't make that call yet. As of right now, I'm enjoying blasting around on it. When we fix a few little issues with it and we go through that maintenance, I think it's only going to get better. So I can see it sticking around for a little bit. But that's what you guys will see in the next video. Full maintenance. I also want to put together a toolkit, so when I'm out adventure riding, something happens to my bike or a buddy's bike, we can fix it. So that's another video that will be coming up soon. So if you guys have any recommendations or anything on tools that I should make sure to include in that kit, you know, please do drop a comment, let me know. I'll make sure that they are included, so I have everything we could possibly need to do a roadside repair should we have to. So we made it home safe and sound, but I wanted to kind of talk through this realization I had while I was riding on the back roads. So while I was riding the KLR, I kind of constantly found myself thinking about this bike. So this is my 78 KZ750 built into a scrambler. Most of you guys should be very familiar with this bike. It's my main rider, and until this bike is the most modern bike that I've owned and ridden. So it's a 1978. That's as new as I've gotten. And what I realize is, because I've only ridden classic motorcycles, I've been riding for 11 years, something like that, and the 78's as new as I've ever gone. I didn't realize that I have built this relationship with my motorcycles as I ride them. So when I'm riding a classic bike, I am constantly thinking about, how are the carburetors tuned? Are there any changes we need to make? Any upgrades? You know, I have this very back and forth, you know, relationship with the bike. When I was riding the modern bike, I didn't have any of that. I didn't have to think about the bike, and it kind of made me miss it a little bit. And I don't know if that's just because it's different or if it's just my personality. I'm obviously a very mechanical person. I've built this business and this channel and everything around my passion for the mechanical side of motorcycling. And I didn't realize until literally like an hour ago that when I'm riding the bike, I'm getting some of that kind of mechanical feedback. And on a modern motorcycle, it's kind of leaving me wanting for that, which might sound a little bit weird for you guys that don't wrench on your own bikes or anything, but I think a lot of you guys that are watching this channel are into the classic motorcycles and you understand what I'm talking about. So it took me a little while to put my finger on it. But what I want to do is give the KLR a proper test. I want to go through all the maintenance in that next video that you guys are going to see. And then I want to take it on an adventure ride and see if the added elements of the terrain being potentially difficult, you know, having to navigate through somewhere, you know, adding a couple of other exciting things to the ride, if that brings that excitement level up to where it would be if I was just riding on a classic bike. And that'll be the true test of if it's going to work out or not. If not, maybe a more exciting motorcycle to ride on the street might bring us to that level. Or maybe we'll determine that I'm just a classic motorcycle guy, and if I'm going to get my jollies on a bike, it better be an old one. And that's definitely possible. So I'm going to take you guys along for the ride as I figure this thing out, but I figured I'd walk you guys through that thought process because I thought that it was is a little bit on the interesting side. So I appreciate you watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.